Good morning. This is another episode of the Unpublic with Citizen Stewart. And today we have Jason B. Allen. Jason is an educator, an activist, a leader, a voice, I should say that too, on multiple platforms, writes, and he does writing on Atlanta, a blog in Atlanta, which obviously is around education, but also social justice issues. One of the recent things that Jason wrote was around bringing social justice into the classroom. And I wanted to talk about that because there is a national conversation about whether or not teachers should be activists, whether or not they should bring social justice teachings into the classroom. There's even some discussion about how it would be better if teachers just kept their politics out of the classroom and just teach. And it feels a little bit like when the Fox News host said to LeBron James, just shut up and dribble.
Right.
Right. So, Jason, welcome and good morning, brother.
Hey, good morning, brother. I'm so honored to be on the show today and, shed some light on this conversation around what teachers should be doing. I find it so ironic that people would rather teachers sit in a chair and babysit children instead of actually helping to liberate and educate and empower them to be their best selves. So I definitely am excited about getting into this conversation.
Well, I want to start out at the outset. We just discussed before we came live the fact that COVID is creating a new reality, and I don't think we should have discussions where we don't honor the fact that our people are still struggling. We have people passing away. We have people becoming ancestors ahead of their time for different reasons. And we always want to make space for our ancestors, for the truth about our existence, and to bring it into the room in whatever discussion that we're having so that it's real. Yeah. So I would just open up this space in the beginning here, basically to say we should honor our ancestors. We should honor those who are becoming ancestors before their time. And we should walk every day with that in our heart, right?
Yes, most definitely. That actually is the inspiration behind my wall that's behind me. It grew from a couple of pictures that I had in my classroom. And when we shut down around this time last year, we had to be innovative, right? And how we were reaching children and, definitely uplifting our ancestors and the work that they do and have done. So in this moment, I'm a little in my emotions only because we lost the activists. We've lost so many in Atlanta within the last year. Several killed, of course, because their liberation was really setting Black people free. But Brother Haron passed last evening. He started the street rumors here in Atlanta. He was for the people. When I was an administrator in Atlanta Public Schools, I had this crazy notion to get single Black dads, retired Black male teachers, and other brothers in the community to walk our children to school so they didn't have to pass prostitutes and, gangs and all of this hoopla that happens on corners of our streets that would take them out of the school. And so this brother had been doing the work, and he showed up with the group of brothers and was like, listen, we've been trying to get the schools on board for years with doing this. So we definitely are here to, be engaged and support your mission and making sure that these children are getting to school on time and safe. And so that's a pillar and giant in our community that definitely would be missed. And his activism that speaks to so much of what I'm doing right now in the classroom. So I definitely appreciate that space just to honor his life and the work that he has done that has really called a lot of us to action here in the Atlanta area.
I think it's so important that we acknowledge the fact that each of us that are in any way engaged in education and upbringing the youth, that some of us carry our stories with us and our ancestors with us into the job, and some of us don't.
Yeah.
So our kids are in the hands of different groups of people every day, some of whom are like you, who carry with them into the classroom your full self. You're showing up as a different representation of a Black man, of our ancestors, of our story. And that is like an encyclopedia in some ways. That's like a library, walking into those child's classrooms every day. But not every kid is lucky across the country. And, I will say this, you're in Atlanta, which is a very Black city, very Black school district or whatnot. And sometimes that might fool you to think that that's the existence that Black children are having across the country.
Yeah.
What would you say about that for the rest of the country who don't have kids walking in every day, and meanwhile their teachers are being told, don't do social justice stuff, don't do race or politics or any of that?
Well, I would be remiss if I said this. Being in Atlanta, we're still advocating for equity in a school district that is serving predominantly Black and brown children, and that has Black leadership in the city council, on the school board, in the city. And so imagine in Atlanta, if we're still advocating for equity, then what's happening in Albany? What's happening in Barlow County? What's happening in areas where Black children don't have anyone who looks like them standing before them and truly advocating for them to get better educational access? And so when I think about this conversation, Chris, I have to go back to last year. And I want to share this story because I know the focus is on social justice in the classroom, and I share my experience, but this is how it started. Christina Guillen, I say one of the best educational leaders of this time, over the years saw what was happening in Georgia. And we've talked about the school to prison pipeline and dismantling it. And this sister said, you know what? I'm going to create a school that allows Black and brown children to be their full selves, where they're not attacked by biased policies. And most importantly, they're not pushed out of school. And so Seven Pillars Career Academy is founded on the principles of Kwanzaa, and it is the first and only non-suspension school in Georgia. Now, I came to Seven Pillars as a special education teacher, and going to professional developments and being in different settings, of course, being a teacher and an activist, I wasn't going to keep my mouth closed. And so I got into a bit of a war with the state, which began to attack my certification, because they were like, if this brother is going to keep calling us out about us poorly educating Black and brown children in special education programs, we've got to get him out of public schools. And this is what happens to Black and brown teachers that lift their voices against the wrongs that are happening to our kids. And so when I think about activism and I think about teachers and the positions that we're placed in, you sign a contract and you're silenced. You need to take care of your family, your parents, your children, your spouse, and you're not able to do that if you don't have a job. And so teachers are faced with, you're either silent and you're going to suffer with these children who we know we aren't educating well, or you're going to be bold enough to lift your voice, and you may have to sacrifice and lose a lot. And so in sharing all of this, I lost my certificate and ended up having to go back to school full time, which did what the state wanted and took me out of the classroom. And so this article that I just recently wrote about why I love teaching and social activism and social justice in the classroom became a reality because of a Black sister who said, you know what? I saw your fight. We stood with you. You may not have won the battle, but this is what we're going to do to show how important this is. And so Ms. Guillen created a program that now has allowed me to enter the classroom again as a part-time teacher and instructor. And I'm focusing solely on teaching social justice through creative writing and advanced writing, and taking the stories of our ancestors and present day activists, such as many of our Bright Bean family, from Zakia to Tanisha to Brother Neo, to the aunties, and so many voices that have been lifted on our platform. I'm able to bring this into the classroom unfiltered and not restricted in a way where my students are now out at rallies with me and protest, and their parents are engaged, and we're writing to our legislators, and we're having conversations with elected officials around policy. So much so, my student Javon, who was on our podcast, the youngest person ever to be on a podcast, 12 years old, and was speaking about what Black and brown children really want to see in schools. And so, Chris, I really appreciate this conversation because too often we aren't hearing from teachers, and we definitely aren't hearing from students that really want to see change in this time of the pandemic that we really aren't seeing a lot of. Now, brother Chris, I think you may be muted, brother.
Oh, I'm saying, see, again, I'm seeing all kinds of profound
I
stuff
I
here.
saw it. I saw you
saw
speaking,
me
and
talking.
I was like, that brother is dropping knowledge, but with the internet.
I was just saying that it sounds like you're mentioning there's a price to be paid for being the teacher that does social justice teachings. Yeah. And that's sad. That's sad that that's still like a reality in this post George Floyd era, where all the corporations and companies and everybody else have put out kind of Black Lives Matter statements, and we're in a new era. It seems a little weird that teachers would still be under pressure to not be radical in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it's the liberation of the mind, right? So the systems in America confine us to a certain degree. And when it comes to education, we were talking about this on the other day. I believe it was Zakia and Tanisha. And, I was mentioning in the comments about how we continue to fight for a system that still isn't even halfway, not even 25% equitable. And they're not trying to make it equitable. And so one of the things that I learned in, the sacrifice of allowing the state to, snatch my certificate away from me because I just was not going to stand by and allow Black children and brown children not to be served well in public schools. It starts in the training programs. And this is one of the things that I have been working with Profound Gentlemen on with the teacher pipeline, right? So, Chris, one of the things I learned in Georgia is that Georgia saved the nation. I love having this conversation with Zakia. We saved the nation, right? But what did that gain us? Because we still have a Republican governor who a lot of people, and maybe this, connects to other states. Our Republican governor, he appoints this committee, right, of people that set the professional standards for educators. And then you have the person leading education in the state who is oftentimes aligned with the governor. And so we can't really make change in the education system if we can't change the pipeline of how teachers are being trained. And it's not happening at all in these training programs of how to effectively reach Black and brown children, and even how to incorporate. I'm gonna share this. I like to share resources, right? So this book, Staying in Charge, is by Demario Harmon Fort, and he's a brother and profound gentleman that has written Stay in Charge, which is a part of Speak Light. And he created this organization because with only 2% of male educators in the nation, we also have to look at the lower percentage of Black males who are social workers, who are graduation coaches, who are behavior specialists, who are counselors. And so he created this book to really help our schools and our teachers reach Black and brown children in particular, because there is not enough training in the school systems that are effectively reaching our children so that we get different results. And so I learned that last year in challenging the state and taking a step back and saying, okay, this happened. How did this happen? Why did this happen? And what can be done to make changes around that?
One of the things that I've said often in these discussions is that the most ironic thing about public schools is that the one thing that you don't learn about while you're in K-12 education is that the real history of K-12 education. Like the institution that you're actually in that is forming you doesn't teach you about itself, doesn't teach you where it came from, how it progressed and how it grew over time, how your portion of it was not always a good portion of it and still isn't. So it would seem weird that an educative, educational institution that the primary goal is to educate people would tell you about itself first. Like, this is how education works, and this is how
It's
the school district works.
brother, but it's modeled now. I'm very racy. I don't know if you've seen the podcast, but I'm very racy, and so I always
The
challenge.
podcast, we should tell people we're talking about Talking the Real Shit, which is a podcast. So the title alone should tell you what the
Oh yeah,
content would be, right? Yeah. So
and we
I'm good with
challenge,
it.
right? We're like Red Table Talk meets the Breakfast Club, centered around education, and
Right.
I always bring in the impact of the Black church because it did the same thing. The Black church, actually, when we think about the creation of HBCUs and the connection to the Black church was where a lot of it, whether it was, a mosque, whether it was a fellowship, whether it was in someone's living room or even in their garage, people were gathering to worship, but they also were learning and they were being educated. And we did not connect the dots to where Master and them, they gave us this book. I always ask this question: are we even in the same edition of the Bible? Like, are they in edition 5 and we're in 78? Like, we don't know because we don't talk about that history. And a lot of our grammar schools started in churches. And it was a format that's very similar to what we're seeing in public schools now, where we're not taught the history of church and school and the separation of state. And why did that take place? Because it's a format that was adopted from how Blacks were taught in the faith-based arena, how they were taught in churches that carried over to how we are taught and how our children are reared and learned in school. So I always like to draw that connection because our conservatism as Blacks definitely spills over into education because of what we have been taught through our faith.
Well, I will say this: as a Black Christian, there is a big difference between the Black church and the white church.
Oh yeah.
And the difference between the Black church and these schools and these public schools is the Black church has remained fairly consistent in building year over year of a Black liberation ideology that's embedded in its Christianity. It's always a freedom struggle. We shall overcome. Moses, let my people go. We were in the woods and now we're free. Like, that's the parts of the Bible that Black theology likes to talk about because it was germane to the life. White theology has a different kind of like prosperity gospel and, other stuff going on, like, like personal piety and these other things that are different, which is why, what civil rights activists said years ago about it being the most segregated hour of the week being on Sunday. You have two totally different schools of theological thought happening on Sundays, right? Like, which is why you can have Christian people think it's okay to go attack the Capitol in the name of Jesus and that Donald Trump is Jesus's representative.
Right.
And you have a Black church who is like, yeah, no, that's, and I'm only making that distinction because I get your point. I'm not contrasting your point, but after 1954, when Black educators and Black schools were closed, Black educators were let go, Black principals across the South were let go. The Black educational theology went a different direction.
Yes.
After that, right?
It went exactly to what you said. That was a great connection, Chris. That was a perfect connection because that's exactly what happened to our schools. We lost that power. And now our children they don't have that connection to, they're not connected spiritually. My students say it. Like, I ask them, what churches are you connected to, or what fellowships? They're not connected. So spiritually, they're not being fed. They have Lee was Cassius Clay. So they're not connected to Black history. They're not spiritually being fed. They don't have a cultural connection to whence we came and who we are. And it's
even in your
almost to
city,
that
though,
dynamic.
even in Atlanta, though, like for me, that for someone who's living far away, that seems so impossible, right? At the seat of like all the civil rights history there.
Oh, brother,
you have giants that are still living there. You have you got Come on.
My students tell you I would throw things in my classroom. And I ask them, I say, so hey, Joseph Lowry, and they're looking at me like they don't
Wow.
know what I'm talking about. Y'all live in Atlanta.
Yeah.
You drive down Larry Boulevard. What do you mean? You're in a school named after a Black person, and this is Black history. You don't know, but we don't have culturally inclusive curriculum in our schools. And so that's when you mentioned that period of the 1950s and how we lost control of Black schools and Black teachers were really, in a sense, pushed out. We lost that, right? Because there's a disconnection of how we integrate Black history into public school curriculum, even if the curriculum itself does not uplift it. And so, how are teachers trained on doing that? Because if you're not trained on doing that, we can't take for granted that because of the color of the skin, that people know history. And so, if teachers are not being trained on how to integrate Black history, more importantly, social activism or social justice into curriculum, then our children are not going to know the very systems that they are fighting against. They don't even know that they're in a fight.
So let me ask you this though. How does that happen in Atlanta? Because for me, Atlanta's like Derek Bell's Afrolantica. It's like Afrolantica is was Wakanda before Wakanda was Wakanda. But you have the milestones, you have the physical markers, the actual church, you have the actual places where Dr. Martin Luther King was, you have all this long-term history of the mayors of that city who did groundbreaking things. So it's all in the ether. Now, if I was an evil genius and I was against Black people, I would have to devise a way that Black children could grow up in that culture rich of an environment and still not know their culture, know their history. So help me out. Where's the evil genius? Because if I was an evil genius trying to make this happen, help me out, man. I don't understand.
So I would definitely say, Chris, that Atlanta is smoke and mirrors. It's not what people think. T.I. will be on national TV and it's the Black Mecca and we are Wakanda. And in our minds, we would like to believe that Atlanta is Wakanda and we would like to believe that it's this Black Mecca. But how can we be when we are failing large numbers of Black and brown children in our school district, when this Black elite and privileged class has taken on these positions of power but have no power? Because I go back through Atlanta history, the Atlanta murdered and missing children, which was an attack on Black boys. It was an attack on the Black family. They raped, molested, and murdered these Black boys, and it was allowed. We had Black leaders, the first Black police chief, the first Black mayor when this happened. And in order for them to keep their power, they were silenced and they remained silent. And then in the late 90s, we had another huge scandal with Black preachers that were molesting and raping and taking advantage of Black children, in particular Black boys. And we covered it up in Atlanta. We failed our children again. Then in the next decade, it was the Atlanta cheating scandal, the largest scandal in the nation, where you have Black mayors, you have ambassadors who were international that were Black. You have all this Black power, all this Black leader, but what does Black power equate to when the very people that we say that we are serving are dying in larger numbers? That the homeless population has grown since there has been Black leadership here in Atlanta and nothing has been done. Black leadership last year, city council president called for Black boys, that Brother Haran and others were out here, myself included, trying to save their lives because in the pandemic, Black people were losing their jobs, right? And so youth took to the streets to sell waters, to sell t-shirts, to sell face masks, to be able to survive. And what did the Black power in Atlanta do? They condemned them. They put in place policy that would restrict them from being able to do this. The council president has been on the news and said, do not give them money. When you see them, call the police. And in gentrified communities, what do you think these new neighbors are doing? They're not calling
Mm,
teachers that know the students. They're not connecting with the schools. They're not calling the church leaders to say, hey, are you familiar with these youth? Oh, I saw a youth out there selling water and they said, call the police. Here we go. And so
mm,
now in a city in Atlanta where Rashard Brooks was killed by the police that caused a national uproar, and now you have police officers who don't want to be held accountable in Atlanta under Black power
mm,
that have a vendetta against who? Black women and Black children. And it's being allowed to happen in a city where Black people are in power. And so my question goes back to this book, The Atlanta Riot. We talked this up on our podcast with the centennial of Tulsa, because a lot of people don't realize that the Black elite played a role in the disenfranchisement of the Black working class and the Black poor. This book is an account of families that still have members alive today
mm,
that saw Black families with privilege, educated, in higher ed, dentists, other professionals that wagered with those very same people that caused the insurrection at the Capitol and white privilege and said, in order for us to
mm,
stop these killings of Blacks, we'll work with you on this, and to hell with the Black working class and the Black poor, they on their own. And it's been like that in Atlanta ever since. The people that are being attacked, Chris, it's not people like me.
mhm,
My
mhm,
family, we're working class. I feel like I'm gonna be okay. But my students that are living in poverty, my students that are disenfranchised, these are the Black people in Atlanta who are being killed, and they have no protection and no one advocating for them. And the very people that say they're working for them, like our new DA, who pimped the pain of our people and got in office and
mm.
then sent the cases away and said, "Oh, I
Wow.
can't, I can't do this." But you told the people that you were going to do it. That's why people
Mhm.
came out and voted for you. And so when we talk about Black power, what is that really? If the people that are in power who look like us are not going to do the things necessary for our people to be advanced.
This is a very important ripple that you're asking and a dangerous one for conversation. But I mean, the dynamic that you just explained, where you have Black people in power at all levels, and
Yes.
there is still a problem, I think expands the notion of what social justice actually is, right? I shouldn't say expands, it confounds what we would normally see as social justice, Black, white, freedom, oppression, and blah blah blah. We don't really talk about the fact that that class could make a certain, like if you get rid of white people. Bill Cosby said this years ago, and I hate to bring up Bill Cosby in what I'm about to say right now, but I got to say it because he said it years ago. He said, if you get rid of white people, Black folks will figure out other ways to hate each other, right? Like just to replace the white people. And what you just described to me is once you get a little something in life, you might join a class where you start looking at your own people as if
Yes.
they're another, right? You're looking at them as another, right? When you were talking about all of that, the cheating scandal stuck out to me because I remember following that very closely. As a matter of
Oh
fact, I
yeah.
wrote about it and dug in on it. And when they did an analysis of who was hurt by it and how long the hurt would go on, it was a generation. So they did a study of who was most hurt by that and how long did the hurt last. And it was the people that you named, working class and underclass students, who for the foreseeable future there was a need to put money into restoring them that they had lost so much in that time period, right?
Yes.
And this testimony of your teachers in that city in the courtroom couldn't have been more bougie. It couldn't have been more looking down the nose at those kids. There were people who literally said, teachers who literally said, I can't plead guilty to this because it'll invalidate my PhD. It'll make my credentials worthless for future earnings. Not that I didn't do it, just I can't admit that I did it. And that's what made the judge so mad. Like I saw tape of him going light on the people who just agreed to it, just said, like, listen, you caught me, I'm sorry, whatever. He went light on them. The ones that went to jail, I saw him go off in the courtroom, and it was mostly because they just wouldn't own up. One of them who did own up to it was the one who was on record saying to one teacher to another, Black, I had to give your kids the answers because they dumb as hell. Right. And that was on record. I will never forget those words of
Yeah.
one educator talking to another educator about Black children. Black teacher talking about Black children. And it was just part of the culture. I couldn't get my
Yeah.
mind around it.
It's the culture, Chris. I was in Atlanta public schools during that time and I was teaching. And, there was definitely a division of class, even amongst the Black and brown educators. You know, it was, I don't want to be in the Title I schools. I don't want to be in the schools in the Douglas cluster or in the Washington cluster or in South Atlanta because that's where the poor Blacks are. And out of respect of Black History Month, I won't use the terminologies that they speak about our own people, but that's what we think. Title I and, disadvantaged students and behavior, all these labels that we create for our students. I ask my students about this, on a weekly basis. What do you all think about the stereotypes that not just this society sets up for us, but then the stereotypes that we as a people buy in about us and just their mindset about allowing people to be who they are, acknowledging that everyone does not want the same path. Every Black boy doesn't want to be a rapper. Every Black girl doesn't want to be a fashion model or a dancer. Why do we, and even if they do, that's totally okay. But why do we push them to only believe one thing, or we push them to fit the stereotypes that we create for them? And so I'm connecting that to the Atlanta cheating scandal because Black educators failed Black children then because we were placing them in boxes and because they weren't living up to a false standard of the public education system. You have those educators who felt like, oh, they're dumb. Oh, they're worthless. Oh, they're of no need. I teach kids that have exceptionalities. I had an exceptionality growing up. I took speech, and then I also had another, learning challenge, but I also was gifted and talented. And so I share my story with my students. And so now a student that has a horrible speech impediment, they'll say, Mr. Allen, you had a speech impediment? Yes, brother, I did. And here's what I did with my teacher that helped me. And they believe it because I'm sharing with them my own experience, because they can tell that Mr. Allen really wants to see me succeed, that he doesn't want to just see me walk out this door and I go into another school year and I don't even know how to spell the school name, or I don't even know how to tell someone where I live or navigate my way home as a middle school student. So what is happening when these kids come into early learning centers and elementary schools that obviously have failed them, because by the time they reach me, it's really too late.
Do you think that the teachers and the colleagues that you had carry this sense of social justice with them, that they understand that education in poor communities is a ministry of a different sort? It's not just teaching like some sort of like cold way of teaching, but it's empowerment, it's uplifting, it's something bigger than you.
Yes.
And what I hear all the time is from teachers, we're doing our best, we care, we love our children, it's all positive. So if I know another educator in Atlanta public schools who would say nothing but positive stuff. All my colleagues are great people who are working very hard every day and love the kids and see their best interest and read all the books. They read all the social justice books and they read all the like anti-racism stuff, and they can recite Kendi, Ingram back and forth to you and whatnot. But I always, as an outsider and as a parent, I'm just not feeling it. Oftentimes I'm just like, I hear that, but I don't believe you.
Yeah. Educators in this time are different. I reflect on Atlanta and all of I remember my first Black male educator. I still talk about Mr. Gordon this day, at FL Stanton, and how he really connected Atlanta's history to the work that he was doing in the classroom. And it appealed to me because my daddy talked about Atlanta history. He knew these people, in being a small business owner, he always reflected on, look at the possibilities of Blackness here in Atlanta. And so when I had a teacher in fourth grade who was like saying the same thing. I was like, oh man, school can be much more than just coming in here and, you know, learning the basic ABCs, one, two, threes. It's like there's so much more that we can actually be learning. But I didn't get another Mr. Gordon until I got to high school. And even a lot of my classmates then never had a Mr. Gordon. And so I'm mentioning that to say that that's still a commonality for a lot of students today. They get a really good teacher, and then they get another teacher who doesn't know how to navigate the system. They may feel like everyone is doing a great thing and I'm doing the best that I can in a system that really doesn't give me the autonomy to teach children in the way that they need to be taught. And that is a big reality for Black teachers that are in public school systems. Like, they have to be very honest. I'm going to do the work that I can do to, one, elevate myself. I mean, let's just be real, to elevate myself, to take care of my family, and to professionally make me look good. The children learning and being on grade level, that may be in the top 5, but that's not in the top 5 of what teachers are thinking about in this time. And especially now in the pandemic, the first thing is it's fight or flight. Let me either find me another job or let me do the things that I need to do in order to make sure that I'm okay and that the children get the best of what I can offer at the time. And that's a big reality for where we are.
I actually don't see how we do better for our kids without a major redesign. Because
Chris, I don't either. My students don't. My students don't. They're like, why? You know, a student leader in Atlanta, and I'm surprised that she's not on right now. She asked this question to her school board members through the platform that Atlanta created. Why are we in a rush to send children back to school when we had one of the largest suspension rates in the state, and we had a mediocre graduation? Oh, Aisha just said in the thing, I'm here. She knew I was talking about. But we aren't even graduating, you know, students on time. We're not even helping students that are working. So, I mean, shout out to Aisha, who is tuned in. She wrote a powerful article that's on Atlanta, so you all can check it out, atlanta.org, around workforce development. And that's one of our calls to action, right? It came from students. Why do we have high school seniors that are working with little support or little training on, you know, workforce development and still having to navigate school and keep their grades up as they're preparing for college with little support from our public school districts that are getting all of this money to say, oh, look at these workforce innovation programs and look at this amazing partnership with Google and Amazon. Our kids are like, listen, we tired of these photo ops, right? And all this praise about these grants. Where is the money? Where are the resources for us to get this training so now, we can actually get the jobs that you all are, you know, so fancied about and parading around? We tired of the charades.
Right.
Where is the money? Where is the progress? Where is the policy?
That actually, right, when young people, first of all, the question of where is the money, like when you're an institution, you ask, that is a very powerful question that leads to many other powerful questions. So I can't think of a more powerful thing to do. If you are a teacher, a community member, a parent, a student, as a former school board member, I will say this much: asking the question about where is the money is a very important question that leads you to all kinds of great answers. Like, we'll tell you, it'll lead you to understanding why you're not getting what you should be getting out of that system. But when a young person asks that question, like that's some next level, like advocacy, because it is your system, young person. I'm telling you right now, if you are in these systems, they only exist because you exist, right? All these salaries, all of these people with titles and credentials and professions who are buying houses in the suburbs, they are doing it on your back. They are living off of your misery, right? And if they are saying you are dumb as hell privately in the teacher's lounge, or showing contempt for your potential and your brilliance and your abilities, then it is incumbent upon you for the handful of people in your life, teachers who will tell you the truth about your existence, to act to free yourself, because you're in a system that's not going to teach you about it. It's not going to teach you about what they do to you. You are really, like, Black children are being processed by schools, processed like meat, right? Like you come in the door and you have 12 years of per pupil allotted to you, and they're stripping you of that and pushing you out into the world like a sausage, like a hot dog, one generation after another, artificial meat, just pushing you through and separating from you like wheat from chaff your money. That's why I say Black children are the new cotton. That's why I say, because school systems are harvesting Black children for their per pupil income, and a whole bunch of people are living off that plantation, right?
And then
social workers, doctors, counselors, teachers, coaches, instructional coaches, people with contracts, businesses, whatever. And you're the product.
Yeah.
Young person listening to me right now, you are the product. Education should be the product. A school should be putting out education, but but you are the product as the Black child. They're processing you, and the process is to separate you from your per pupil income, so all these middle class people can live, and they can live well, and then show disdain. Now, I don't know if you think that's too harsh of criticism.
That's so spot on. That's spot on. I'm looking at the comments too. From people who are chiming in. So just shout out to Atlanta. I see some of my former co-workers from Atlanta that are commenting as well, and then some of these student leaders. And this is so important because, one of our other leaders asked a question around SROs, which are resource officers in schools.
Mm-hmm.
And one point that Aisha made in Gwinnett County, where she's a high school senior, is that we have all this money. I was dropping knowledge on them. I said, y'all, listen, this is what, shout out to Aaron Fernandez, who was my principal in Atlanta Public Schools when I taught at Bunch Middle School. And he said, if you really want to make change, you have to follow the money. He was like, follow the money and teach the children. And I have been doing that in my career, following the money and teaching the children to do the same thing. Because when your parents are trying to figure out, well, why is my child not making progress? And if my child has a plan, whether it's an IEP, whether it's a 504, whether it's in a teacher parent conference and we set up goals that we're going to accomplish for this child, why is it not moving the way it should if we come out with these elaborate plans? And that's what we continue to do, is create these elaborate plans and not send the money where it needs to go. And so the Atlanta Student Coalition members, after researching their school districts, $2 million, $3.8 million set aside for school resource officers in the pandemic, when we're not even in face-to-face learning. And then you have kids that don't have devices to get online to learn, or you have exceptional learn. Yes, still today in Atlanta, in the metro Atlanta area, there are still not 500,000 families now, but still over 450,000 families in the state of Georgia who don't have internet access. And it became worse after the election because it was a definite attack on people of color. And so now even more of our children are disenfranchised, which has elevated the conversation of, well, let's return to face-to-face learning. Well, the students are like, face-to-face learning? So you want me to go back into a crowded public schools when you all weren't even paying the bus drivers that are still on strike, that you weren't paying the custodians who were keeping the building clean, and they were already struggling to do that. So now we want to send Black and brown children into unclean classrooms with teachers who are frustrated, some who don't want to teach, others who are fearing for their lives, and others who feel confined to break the mold of what is being set in public schools, to say, listen, I'm going to elevate and teach you regardless of what they're saying, the things that you need to know. And so these are all things that students are saying on their platforms and using their voices to speak out against, because everyone is at the table, Chris, except for our students.
Yeah, I feel like the idea that people have a fear that teachers bring social justice in the classroom is that they feel like they're going to be bringing their own opinions, indoctrinating kids into a specific way of thinking. But when it comes down to teaching kids how to advocate for themselves, no matter where they are, that's a different story,
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's
so
good.
I get the fear of, like, bringing social justice into the classroom means you might have some woke 25-year-old in Chicago who read some stuff over the weekend, and she comes in and tries to present a lesson to her kids. That's different than someone like you or others in a place like Atlanta who are teaching young people, like, investigate the systems that you're in. Investigate, and this is your system, so use your voice too. Like, speak up. Um, do you feel like still, though, that there's pushback from parents or from people in the public who, even with that definition, are like, I don't think that you
Oh
should
yeah,
be teaching kids this stuff?
definitely. And I think that it takes, school leaders like Ms. Guillen, and that's the freedom that we have in independent schools, whether they're,
Mm,
non-traditional charters, magnets, homeschool programs, independent, learning pods. You have that autonomy. I remember Ms. Guillen frequently saying, we have students that identify with different religious beliefs, who identify as LGBTQ, who identify as X, Y, or Z. And so we have an obligation to respect them, to empower them, and most importantly, to educate them. And that at the end of the day is what we have to do as educators. And in teaching my students about social justice and activism, I have a whole row of books that is going down my wall. And these are books that I take time to read because, again, we don't have curriculum that reflects these things. And then I challenge my students and their parents. And I use this as a strategy. And I want to make sure I weave in the connection with parents to your question, because parents have to be on board.
mm,
And,
mhm,
shout out to Dr. Hill. I'm calling out my former educators, who are Black males who I learned and did this work. Dr. Hill was all about community engagement. I would never forget him standing on the top of our school and watching around the community, seeing where we trying to hide out at, who wasn't getting on the bus, who was at the MARTA station still hanging out, trying not to come to school, because he was that intentional about making sure that we were learning. And so how do we get educators like this, educational leaders like Ms. Guillen, who are willing to challenge the status quo and say,
mm,
listen, activism is important to our children and this next generation, changing the things that must happen so that we don't have another insurrection that is allowed. And that, to be quite honest, Chris, that is celebrated in the face of Black and brown children who just last year were in the streets marching
mm,
for social justice and for Black Lives Matter and for voting rights. And to see this happen at the Capitol in our face, it's like, what are we doing wrong to reach this next generation? Well, it starts with teaching the minds of Black children and brown children and mixed race children and white children and Asian, et cetera, and so forth. And so that's what I would say in regards to the connection. Parents who want to see change are going to be on board. Parents who don't know, may be a little bit apprehensive, but again, it goes back to that engagement, Chris. I have not come across a parent yet today that has said, I don't want my child
mm,
exposed to the knowledge that you're dropping, because
mhm,
I know that I have to reach them as well as the community. So let me take it a step further, that real teachers who are serious about this, we know that I can't just reach the child. I have to reach the parent, but I got to reach the family too, because
mhm,
I realized that mom and dad may be getting ready to separate, or dad's mom may be getting ready to pass away, and there's a transition happening in the family. So now I got to reach the child, I got to reach the parents, I have to reach the family, and then I have to reach the community, because I understand, as Brother Haran would say, that the community has an influence too. And so now,
mhm.
as a teacher, I'm doing my lesson with the student, but I have to find an innovative way to reel in the parents and the community, because the same language that I'm speaking in front of these kids during our daily lessons in the classroom, I need someone in the community and someone in the household that is also reflecting that same message.
I think is so important about that point. I've been introduced to a new word recently. I don't know if you know this, Jason. You probably don't. I'm in a college program right now, and one of my professors has written a lot of work around African-centered education. Has written a lot of it, and a lot of it very unique because he writes it from a bisexual Black male standpoint. So I'm being introduced to a lot of like research I hadn't seen before or whatever. But in one of the things that he sent me, there was this word in there, and I was like, I have never heard of this word before, and it was andragogy. And I was like, what is andragogy? So I had to like dig deeper because there was a definition in there. And it's very simple. Actually, when we talk about pedagogy, pedagogy is about children. Peda is about children. Andragogy is the exact same thing about teaching adults. So when you were just talking about parents, when I first saw andragogy, I thought, what is our andragogy around education activism? What are we teaching parents? Are we doing it in a methodical way? Do we have a method for doing it? Are we putting as much thinking about the way that we engage and teach parents and adults as we do with their children?
That's good.
And I feel like this might be something of a missing link because we have so many people trying to organize parents without having an andragogy. We have so many people trying to put T-shirts on them without having an andragogy. We have so many people like trying to say, I represent parents without any type of like, if you have a parent in your stable that is working with you for a year or longer, and they aren't self-sufficient as an activist after a year being with you, I think your andragogy is probably weak, like real weak sauce. So I want to dig deeper on this over time because I really believe that like I hate introducing a fancy word. It resonated with me that pedagogy is something we talk about all the time, but we don't talk about how you teach adults. And that discussion lives within adult basic education, which is very niche. It's very niche.
This is Chris. You're so spot on. I went through Dr. Karen Mapp's family and community engagement program at Harvard to get certified in that, and it was such amazing work because I was able to come back to Atlanta and help build the current family engagement department that they aren't following the blueprint for, may I add. Andragogy is so important because teaching is ongoing, and that is the common denominator right there. We have these conversations at the Atlanta Student Coalition. You know, I've created a space to be able to train and work with and educate students on the importance of lifting their voices to things that they know are not socially and civically, politically correct or right for people that look like us. But who's doing this for parents? It's one thing to get parents engaged at school board meetings, but if parents don't know how the system is operating, then what are we really doing? And I wanted to draw on that analogy and that example because I know for a fact, as a former district administrator, that these public school districts are not investing in family engagement. Well, why? Because there's power in family engagement. That's why we believe that it takes a village to raise a child. So if I want to pay the parent liaison $14 an hour or $10 an hour or $11.12 an hour to do a full-time job, and I hire this one person that is responsible for hundreds of parents, do you think that one person has the autonomy and the time to sit down with Mary and Joseph and everyone else and learn their family history and their story and what they need and what are the economic challenges that are presented to them that are not allowing their children to get to school on time or preventing some type of I want to say a channel for them to be able to excel in school. These things are blocked because parents are overwhelmed with trying to, grow up because a lot of them are still growing up. They're trying to take care.
If you're an educational institution and you are educators, though, you would be thinking about what do they need in terms of learning, right? So like when I think about, you just hit a word that triggers all my buttons, which is school districts talking about parent engagement. So there's a range of words that we use about parents being in the educational process. One is involvement, One is engagement, and you can find several variants of either involvement or engagement, but none of them are freedom, right?
No.
So if I'm engaging you, no, first of all, let's start with empowerment. If empowerment implies that I have something that you don't, and I'm giving it to you. I'm empowering you to be a parent or to, blah, blah. And, bottom line is the power is within you already. So don't let me act like I'm giving you anything. It's in
That's
you.
good.
I need you to see it and understand it because it's an internal part of your body. I'm not empowering anybody. You have the power. So empower implies I'm giving you, I'm pouring power into you, and then you're, being a powerful person when really the power is in you and I just need to uncover it like an onion. I just need to discover it and then you're off to the races. You're your own
Yeah.
self-powered person. Involvement means like I still own the process, but I'm involving you. Let me involve you in the process of raising your own damn child, right? That don't make any sense to me, right? Like, let me involve you
No,
in,
you're right, man.
so, and
That's spot
engagement.
on.
Engagement even still, I think, means I own the process and I'm just engaging you in the process, right? When in actuality, I should help you become a sovereign country, like the true, and you're an educator. I'm not, like, so you understand parts of the sciences that I don't, but like, wouldn't you need to have a rubric of some sort for how this is going to go? Like, if I'm going to
Well,
work with you over time, shouldn't I have a parent rubric knowing that what I'm doing is helping you or working?
well, most definitely. I'm a champion for family engagement more so than parent involvement. Uh, Mainly because that isn't functional for Black and brown families. I have children who are raised by their grandparents. I have children in foster care. These are not parents. They're not traditional parents.
Mm-hmm.
So parent involvement right there cuts out about 74% of the people that are rearing Black and brown children. We need to be reaching aunts and uncles and godparents and older siblings and grandparents and step parents and foster parents. We need to be involving everyone who is connected to our children. That's why I'm a champion for family engagement in the sense that it also brings in the community, not so much to say that, hey, I want you to be engaged in what the school is doing, but most importantly, hey, this is what we're doing and we cannot do this without you. So what are your thoughts? And that's when those things happen, community leaders can come to the table and say, baby, listen, we had a whole block of people that are in generational poverty. So you trying to have this workshop on being an entrepreneur, what is that going to do when they didn't even get GED? So then you're able to go back and say, listen, I need to rework this program, because if I have money set aside to, build entrepreneurs, but we need to be building a workforce here, then I need to rechannel those funds. But see, that happens when we're engaged with community leaders and with parents and with retired teachers and with other persons in the family to say that, oh, these are missing links. So now how can we as a community, as a family, be engaged to bring these resources to the table? But that can't happen, right? If school districts are not invested in family engagement, if they don't have but one person in the school that is organizing and driving parents. And I can tell you right now, from being a district administrator leading family engagement, from being a parent liaison in the school, from running after school programs, that is the last thing on the minds of a teacher or a paraprofessional who, quite frankly, in a lot of districts are already overworked. And so they dump everything on the parent liaison because they're like, listen, I just see parent and they have given me a whole list. This is what the school systems do. They give the teachers a whole list of things that this is what you have to do as a checkoff, right? Because we just want to check the box. That's what too many people are doing. And it goes to this one person. It is never done with fidelity because it's intentionally designed to be that way. So when you have school districts like Clayton County, with 7 Pillars sits and they are driving family engagement, now you have a district that says, listen, the majority of our parents, our educators, our community leaders have said that we want to do virtual learning. That is what's going to help our communities get back in place. We're able to partner with the community as they're rebuilding, changing their structures. Churches are changing how they're operating in Clayton County. Black-owned and small businesses are changing how they're operating, and they have the time to do that with the school system without high numbers of COVID cases, right? but they listened to student leaders that came from Seven Pillars, or like Aisha and Gwinnett, that were empowered, that were encouraged, that were motivated to lift their voices and say, hey, this is what we want to see. What are you guys going to do to work together as adults to get us what we need?
Yeah. I would love to see people working with parents. As a parent and a parent activist myself, see us as being the real power and seeing
Yeah.
themselves as just facilitating our power and holding themselves accountable for helping us understand, demystify, so that we can at one day be ruthless and be unstoppable. Like we shouldn't want people organizing us into something where they want to keep us. And my trajectory. So I've been saying for a while that I'm 3 decades in as a parent, and I just realized I'm going into my 4th decade as a parent. My first decade as a parent, I was very I didn't know much, and I was insecure about what I knew and my position, and I let professional people push me around all the time because I felt like they were the experts and they knew everything. It wasn't until I knew enough to feel like I have power in a situation that things started to change for me as an activist. And I'd love to see that same trajectory for all parents. As we wrap here at the end of the end of our time together, like, what is your message? What is your hopes and dreams and your message for the educator that comes into these systems not fully knowing what they're going to face, but they do want to be on the right side of social justice and they want to do the right thing, but they just haven't learned yet what it's going to be like when they get there? How do you give them an honest message and prepare them?
Well, this is my call to action, right? I would definitely say, for any future educators, I've had a couple of people who've reached out to me, and I always say, let's start with research so that you can look at different models of where this is actually working successfully, because my shirt says success, by the way, shout out to Profound Gentlemen. We don't focus a lot on what's working. We know what's not working. So we have so many examples of public schools, traditional models that are not working, but we should also be uplifting the Center for Black Educators Development, because that's a resource. If you really want to know how to do the work, I need you to connect with Brother El Mekki, because him and his team, they know how to get it done. I need you to connect with Profound Gentlemen and the Profound family that also has Profound Ladies, as they're training teachers of color to really work with schools on changing policies, on implementing better models of training teachers to be more mindful of how we're educating Black and brown minds, and also mindful of how we're educating children, period, about social justice. There are organizations that are led by Black and brown leaders that have curriculums, that have resources in place to help drive this work. And we have to be available to put ourselves in a position to take advantage of these resources, and they're out there. And so I want to highlight for future educators, find these organizations. Most importantly, and not just because I'm on Chris' show, but connect with the Bright Beam Network, because we have so many people that are connected to activists on the ground, that are connected to educators,
best advice
who are
today
doing the work. We go to BET, right? We go to Media Takeout, and we go to TMZ for all the news. Well, this is what I tell parents. You want to know what's happening in schools. You want to know what's changed. You're interested in being an educator. You're tired of these kids breaking in your car. Well, listen, you need to connect to anything that the Bright Beam Network is doing, because you have activists from all over: aunties, grandparents, parents, young teachers, older teachers, retired teachers, nonprofit leaders, whatever you can think of, our network has it. And so that's my call to action, people. We have to take the time to do the research and connect. And that's my coalition building speech for today.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you for coming on today, and definitely appreciate the bright light that you bring to the work. It's amazing. For everybody watching and listening, this has been an hour with Jason B. Allen, his Twitter handle is running across the bottom there. You can reach him through Twitter. You also can go to Atlanta, which is his blog, where you can find more of his writings and his thoughts, his ideas. He's also the co-host of the Talking the Real Shit podcast, which is on the Bright Beam Network, which I love, that we have all these voices. My final word on all of this is basically to say it used to be the African proverb of "it takes a village," which is now a cliche, actually was, I think, it was good advice before colonial rule over the entire world. Today, it doesn't take a village anymore. It takes a revolution.
Yes.
And Lerone Bennett said it best: if you are an educator in a system of oppression, you are either a revolutionary or an oppressor. And for teachers listening to this, I would ask you to make a decision every morning about which of those two things you want to be, because you can go into a system and you can be hired into a system to be transformed by it or to transform it. Those are two totally different things. You can go in, you can become a police officer and then eventually have it shape you to be just like every other police officer, or you could go in and be the one who tells the truth and changes the systems that are harming our people. Same thing in education. So every morning there's a decision to make. Every morning there's a question you can ask yourself. I am in a system of oppression. Am I going to be an oppressor or a revolutionary? And revolutionaries, honestly, don't worry about things like I might lose my job. Now, I'm not telling you to do anything that you're not comfortable with in terms of your own life circumstances or whatnot. But I am saying that maybe you should set yourself up to the way in which you can't be fired for doing what's right. Meaning you might want to work in an independent school where people share your values. You might want to work in a system with other people who understand that you need to infiltrate and double cross the system, not become part of it. You might need to just realize that you're going to be there for as long as you can be there, and then you might not be there anymore, right? Like just tell yourself, between you and your Jesus, Lord, I'm going to go into this thing and I'm going to do this thing. And the moment that you tell me that I need to step back from it and walk away from it, I will do that, because truth is going to be truth no matter what. So I will fire myself for truth. I will fire myself. I will be done with this or whatnot. But what I won't do is become part and parcel to a system that is harming 8 million Black children every day and not helping them reach their highest potential. That's what I won't do. So I hope, as a parent, I hope there are more teachers saying that to themselves in the morning, because as somebody who's entrusting my children to your system, I would love to know that I have some allies on the inside who are willing to transgress the system, to be revolutionaries, to double cross the system when necessary, and to make sure that my child is treated like a child of God, like they have unsurpassable worth granted to them at birth, and that they are not going to allow a system to take that away from them just for money, and to keep the system as it is. Thank you all for watching. So all my people watching this morning, I appreciate you for giving us an hour or more of your time. It tells me that there are people in this world who have long attention spans for things that matter for our children, right? We are such in the Real Housewives culture of the last soundbite minute or whatever, that sometimes we can't be bothered with the things that will save our children. But the fact that you're here this morning making all these comments and saying all this beautiful stuff in the comment section tells me that we are not alone. We are together. We will win, and we will win for our kids. Thank you all so much.